In 1877, a young man had a falling out with his best friend over a girl. Happens all the time, you say. True, but this story has a twist. That's the reason why we're sharing it with you today. Hello, folks. I'm Steve Gilly, and this is Stories, a History of Appalachia. Now, be sure to go down below, click that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, ding the bell to get updates on our latest episodes as they come out, and if you don't mind, give us a thumbs up too. 16-year-old Jacob Smith and his neighbor Henry Craig were best friends who lived in Carrington, Kentucky, east of Lexington back in 1877. That year, though, saw the end of their friendship. You see, the two had both met a girl, and they both fell madly in love with her. The love they both had for her soon turned into hatred for each other as jealousy reared its ugly head, leading to the two friends becoming bitter rivals. Soon that rivalry turned deadly. On September 14th, 1877, Henry's body was found by a passerby on the side of a footpath. The police were called in for an investigation, and after examining the body, the boy's death was ruled a murder since it was apparent he'd been killed in a stabbing. Suspicion immediately fell upon Jacob, and fearful of what might happen to him, Jacob gathered up his belongings and took off from Kentucky, going first to Seymour, Indiana, then moving from there to Kansas, later to Missouri, and finally to Martinsville, Illinois, where he arrived in 1886. During his time on the run, he made his living as a farmhand, working for the owners of one farm or another, and in Martinsville he was employed by a farmer named Martin Tarble. It was there that his life completely turned around. You see, a very wealthy widow, about 3 or 4 years older than Jacob, saw him on Mr. Tarble's farm, and she became instantly smitten with him. This woman, Roxana Sword, and Jacob Smith began dating, and before you know it, love had blossomed. Within a year, the couple were married. After the two were married and settled down, the new Mrs. Smith came to a decision. Her late husband had left her with a sizable inheritance, so she came to the conclusion that any husband of hers shouldn't be doing lowly farmhand work. From her own money, she paid for Jacob to go to college to become a doctor. Jacob Smith did so, studying diligently and finally earning his medical degree. After gaining his medical license, Dr. and Mrs. Smith settled down to a comfortable life in nearby Marshall, Illinois, accompanied by Mrs. Smith's son from her first marriage, Guy Sword. Dr. Smith prospered in his medical practice. He became prominent there in Illinois, leading to him establishing a sanitarium at Marshall, which he ran. He was well liked by his patients, and things were going quite well for the young doctor. Then, as often happens, everything came crashing down around him. You see, Mrs. Smith just happened to be the jealous type, and she soon became upset at the good doctor's relationship with his female patients. In 1898, she became very jealous of one particular patient, leading to Roxana nagging her husband about her. Soon she and the doctor began to argue nonstop about this patient, with Guy joining in to defend his mother. These arguments soon became so caustic that they caused Guy to leave the house to travel out west to get some peace and quiet. Even though he was gone, the doctor and his wife continued to fight about not only this patient, but other women he was treating. After a couple of months out west, Guy Sword decided it was time to return to Illinois, doing so on New Year's Eve, 1898. The time away helped settle him down. Returning to the constant bickering between his mother and his stepfather got him worked up again. He soon started to quarrel with Dr. Smith, and one thing led to another until Guy grabbed his Winchester rifle and proceeded to shoot his stepfather 4 times, twice in the neck, once in the arm, and once in the hand. Smith managed to walk from the residence part of the building to the practice part before he collapsed from the wounds to the neck. After treatment at the hospital, he stabilized and recovered from his wounds. Guy was arrested, along with his mother, who had apparently egged him on in the argument that ended in the shooting. Both were indicted for attempted murder and were released on bail. Mrs. Smith having at one time heard the story of the stabbing death of Henry Craig from her husband, headed to Carrington in August 1899 and registered at the local hotel as Mrs. Jones, telling a story that she was in town to purchase real estate. Instead, she looked through the court records and found the original indictment of her husband for the murder of his friend all those years before. Mrs. Smith went to the Carrington Chief of Police, A.N. Denton, and told him that she was married to Jacob Smith and that she knew where he was. In September, Denton arrived in Marshall and placed Dr. Smith under arrest and transported him back to Owensville, Kentucky to face trial for the murder of Henry Craig 20 years before. Well, Smith went on trial in October, his attorneys arguing that he'd acted in self-defense, stating that Mr. Craig had been the aggressor and that Mr. Craig's brother had been present, ready to help in his attack on Jacob Smith. The prosecution presented its proof, followed by Dr. Smith's defense, and on October 4th, 1899, the case was in the hands of the jury, which began to deliberate. And folks, that deliberation didn't take long. After 6 hours, the jury returned to the courtroom to announce its verdict. Dr. Jacob Smith was found not guilty of the murder of his one-time best friend 20-plus years before. Now, after telling you all that story, I'd imagine that many of you are wondering about two things. First, what happened to Roxana Smith and her son Guy? Well, that one we can't answer because after Dr. Smith was acquitted of murder charges, the press apparently lost interest in the case because there are no further news reports about mother and son. Second, what happened to that girl that the two boys had fallen madly in love with? Well, this one we can answer to a certain extent. It appears that she moved on pretty quickly from her love triangle, marrying and living to all accounts an unremarkable life in Kentucky with her family and friends, likely unaware of all the drama she'd caused. And folks, that's the story of a fugitive accused of murder who becomes a prominent doctor before he's brought back to face justice. Another bit of the history of this place we call home, Appalachia. Thanks for listening. Now, you can subscribe to the audio version of this podcast at Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app. You can also, as I said earlier, subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking the subscribe button. And be sure to ding that bell too so you can get notice of our latest stories. And as always, till next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.